Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now I apologise for the sort of all over the place upload schedule recently. I've not been feeling very well, I've smashed my car up and it's just been pretty hectic over the past few weeks. Hopefully now we can get back on track, and today I want to talk to you about Intel Xeon processors. Now I seem to live in a town where there's tons of boot sales, boot fairs and markets, and more often than not I find stalls with people selling old computer parts. It's something that started happening over the past few months, but I'm glad people do it because you can find some fantastic bargains, including this Xeon that I picked up this morning. Now this is an E3 1230 processor. It has 4 cores, 8 threads, and I picked it up for just £30 British, around 45 American dollars. Now that's not very cheap, but when you compare it to how much these retail for currently on eBay, I like to think I got a pretty good deal, especially considering I got 4 cores and 8 threads. Now a lot of these Xeons come in 4 thread and 4 core variants, and you can even find some dual core ones as well, which obviously wouldn't be as good for CPU intensive tasks. You can find Xeons in E3, E5 and E7 variants, much like the i3, i5 and i7 chips from Intel. And this one is actually the version 1 series of the chip under the Sandy Bridge architecture. Unlike traditional Intel chips, there'll be a V1, V2 and a V3 version of the same processor that will be slightly improved with each generation. For example, this E3 1230 is the version 1 of the chip, but there's also an Ivy Bridge V2 version and a Haswell Socket 1150 V3 version. Obviously the V3 versions or the V2 versions are better than the V1 versions, but the V1 versions are a lot cheaper. Just watch out when you're purchasing them used on eBay that you know which version you're buying in case you have a specific model number in mind. So today I'm going to be putting this cheap processor to the test and finding out what this Sandy Bridge 1155 Xeon can do when it comes to CPU intensive tasks and gaming, and talking about whether or not you should buy one of these if you can find one cheap enough. So let's get into it. So as this is the first gen E3 1230, we'll be focusing only on the performance of this one, especially as it's the cheapest in the range, plus it's on the affordable 1155 socket too, which means there are plenty of cheap motherboards for it on the used market. It works on my Gigabyte H61M S2PV just fine. So what sort of performance did my £30 get me? Well, let's start with some CPU tests. Now I have to mention the tests were carried out at stock speeds today because of my aforementioned cheap motherboard. The first thing tested was Cinebench R11.5, usually it's R15, but I seem to be having problems with that crashing on my PC's latest update. In Cinebench, the Xeon E3 1230 scored 6.662 points, which means that you can expect this to perform somewhere in between an i5 2500K and i7 2600K, cutting it closer to the i7's performance. The hyperthreading will really give it a nice edge over the cheaper at the time Xeon E3 1220 and 1225 too, which both have just 4 threads. A test I always like to try is rendering. Using Premiere Pro 2015, the Xeon E3 rendered a 30-second Full HD 60fps video clip in just 22 seconds. For reference, that's quicker than my old i5 4460 on the Haswell socket by a good few seconds, and working in Premiere Pro with this processor feels smooth and snappy. But what about gaming? Well, I tested out some modern and popular games I enjoy playing to see how this thing performs with my 1060 and 8GB of DDR3 memory. First up, it's Assassin's Creed Origins. The 1.05 update has pretty much broken this game for me, and many others apparently too. I've seen graphical downgrades and an overall lower frame rate, not to mention the constant freezes while the game loads textures in certain areas. It's like playing Morrowind now, where you have to wait for the area to load. CPU usage has also increased, so the game is at its most demanding at the time of this video. I've opted for medium settings and saw an average of 47 FPS with a 1% low of 32 and a 0.1% low of 7. COD World War II next with a mix of medium and high settings to achieve 87 FPS on average. With a 1% low of 56 and a 0.1% low of 10, there was definitely some stutter and slowdown, but overall the game felt very smooth and playable, with the Xeon faring pretty well in this system overall. GTA 5 next, which ran with the highest settings with 71 frames per second, followed by percentile figures of 50 and 41. A very playable experience here with the £30 Xeon sitting nicely at the centre of this PC. Turning things up higher would still mean at least 60 FPS, but high still looks fantastic and plays almost perfectly. Finally, it's Battlefield 1. With the highest settings once again and 1080p resolution, the game ran with 77 frames per second on average. There was no real stutter here with percentile figures of 49 and 38 respectively, and overall most games will run fine, unless that game suffers from general performance issues anyway. There are plenty of used and capable Xeons on the market, but it's all about finding the right one for the right price. At £30, this was a decent find, but because it usually retails over 100, you'd be better off finding a used i5 or i7 as they can be had for less. Don't underestimate the power of old Xeons though, because they are definitely worth considering when it comes to putting a system together, and if you're looking for something that can handle CPU intensive tasks like editing, rendering and a bit of Photoshop with ease, then an old Xeon is definitely the way to go over something like an old Core i series processor. Guys, thank you for watching. I'm pretty happy with this £30 Xeon find today. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know what sort of bargains you found at car boot sales and other places like that, as well as leaving a like if you enjoyed it, leaving a dislike if you didn't, and subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already.